One of the benefits of moderating is that you have the opportunity to introduce really awesome and accomplished people. And so I have a very short bio for each one of our panelists today. If I had their full bio, then we would be here till well into the evening, probably midnight. So I am going to start from what I believe would be your left. Is that right? I'm going to start with Reverend Doug Van Dorn. So Reverend Van Dorn is pastor of Plymouth United Church of Christ, an open and affirming congregation by the vote of the congregation. It's been publicly open and affirming of LGBT persons since 1998. He's a longtime and current member and past president of the board of directors of the Grand Rapids Urban League. He's a past member and past president of the board of directors of the Planned Parenthood Centers of West Michigan and of Northern Michigan. Reverend Van Dorn is also the co-founder of the Concerned Clergy, which is an organization of clergy urging greater openness to LGBT persons in church and society. He's been awarded the Helen Clater Civil Rights Award from the Grand Rapids Community Relations Commission. He is also a two-time recipient of the ACE Award presented by the Grand Rapids Pride. Reverend Van Dorn holds a Bachelor's of Social Work degree from a Master's of Social degree and a Master's of Divinity. A Bachelor's of Social Work and a Master's of Divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary in Biblical Studies and Pastoral Care. Please help me welcome Reverend Van Dorn. Next, we have another giant, Colette Segan-Beagley. She's the director of Grand Valley State University LGBT Resource Center. In 2010, she attained this position after being the assistant director for 2 years. Prior to her work at GVSU, Colette was director of communications for the Triangle Foundation, Michigan Anti-Violence and Advocacy organization serving the LGBT community. Colette holds a Master's of Science in Counseling and Mental Health and is licensed as a marriage and family therapist in both California and in Michigan. Colette has served as co-chair of the Great Lakes region of the National Consortium of Higher Education LGBT Resource Professionals and as co-chair for the Michigan Higher Education Consortium for Equality, an organization which serves existing as well as burgeoning campus LGBT resource centers in Michigan. She has also served on the board of Equality Michigan. Currently, she sits on the advisory board for Expanding the Circle LGBTQ Studies and Services in Higher Education. In 2008, Colette received the West Michigan Pride ACE Advocacy Award for her work on behalf of the LGBT community. And in 2012, the GVSU Women's Commission presented her with the Maxine Swanson Award for Leadership in support of the rights of women at Grand Valley State University. Please help me welcome Colette Segan-Beagley. And we continue. Faye Richardson Green is a longtime diversity and inclusion leader and is the director of global learning and development for Steelcase Corporation. Within Steelcase, Faye has worked tirelessly to create an organizational culture that is equitable, diverse, and inclusive, guiding the research, development, and engagement of the diversity efforts and strategies since 1992, and leading the company's diversity redesign efforts in 2009 and 2010. What it doesn't say here is that she was the corporation's first chief diversity officer. She is also the co-founder and board chair for Partners for Racism-Free Community, which envisions and works toward a community of compassion and justice that promotes racial harmony. She remains an active founding member of the Summit on Racism. Faye holds a bachelor's degree in communications from Oakland University and an MBA from Grand Valley State University. She is also a very proud certified diversity and inclusion professional, receiving that certification from the prestigious Cornell University. Please help me welcome Faye Richardson Green. And finally, we have Dr. Adriel A. Hilton. He serves as the Assistant Vice President for Inclusion Initiatives for Grand Valley State University. His responsibilities include consulting, advising, and providing support and informational resources on subjects of diversity and inclusion compliance to all levels of the administration, faculty, and staff. Additionally, he acts as program liaison to GVSU's Office of Multicultural Affairs, the Women's Center, the LGBT Resource Center as well. Dr. Hilton honed his expertise in higher education, administration, and teaching in his previous positions at Upper Iowa University, where he served as the executive assistant to the president and the chief diversity officer, excuse me, as well as assistant secretary to the board of trustees. Dr. Hilton holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and finance from Morehouse College in Atlanta. He has a master's of applied social science with a public administration emphasis from Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, and his PhD in higher education administration from Morgan State University in Baltimore. He has spared me the task of having to read all of his numerous awards, accomplishments, and publications, but please help me welcome Dr. Adriel Hilton as well. So as we begin with the panel, what I'd like to do is just get overall impressions from our panelists on some of your thoughts about the movie, some of the takeaways that you saw, some of the major messages that you felt coming out. And we will just start from left to right, and we'll start with Reverend Van Doren.
Well, there are many of them, but certainly just how, certainly how widespread the damage that can be done with, the kind of unthinking, bigotry, thinking of oneself before for others, but just how widespread, how it's the disease that just then continues to move and affects so many people. Obviously, it's television, so they can make great leaps in a short period of time. We may want to talk a little bit more about how long it takes to make the kind of change that Celia made. But just at this point, I won't say more because the rest of the panel will have a chance.
Well, two things I was impressed with from the film. The first one was at the end when Celia says to Caroline, "You're perfect." And truly she is, right? It's our society that is imperfect, that gives us messages about our children who are gay or gender nonconforming, that makes us fit them into boxes which are at times deadly, not just for the child, but for the family as well. And the second thing was that I was really deeply saddened, especially seeing it for the second time, about the impact of Celia's bigotry on her own humanity. And I was thinking of that phrase, when one is oppressed, all are oppressed. And certainly you see it in this film, that the damage extends to Celia's daughter Caroline, to the grandchildren, to her fiance, to her fiance's daughter. It's pervasive. And that when she lets go of her humanity through this kind of homophobia, that people think less of her, that they're disappointed, that they're hurt, that they're damaged by this. And then her own coming to terms with the damage that she's done and being able to come into a better version of herself at the end. So those are the things that were really
excellent.
impressive to me.
Thank you.
First of all, is the mic on?
No, that's on.
So I will use my non-mic voice. There were two things that impressed me. The first one was how easy it is for us to talk about unconditional love and how difficult it is to practice it, especially as parents, because we imbue our children with so many of our own expectations. So that was the first thing that struck me. The second thing that struck me were the two children that lived with Caroline, how much they were both observers and absorbers of what was happening in their family system, and that no one was actually taking time with them to help make sense out of what was happening within this family system.
For me, the two takeaways was, ultimately the series is one about family and how they respond to each other when confronted with different situations. So though there are definite struggles and disagreements, family, in whatever state it finds itself, remains family. So without forgiveness, there can be no love, and without love, family really is all for naught. The series is pleasant respite from U.S. Hollywood entertainment, and that the action is a little slower. And the Drury Yorkshire background from one that has traveled abroad, it allows the characters to appear realistic compared to U.S. contemporary films. So I'm able to get a sense of what they are experiencing. Also missing is the oftentimes distracting hair, makeup, and sleekness that accompanies U.S. productions in Hollywood and L.A. and in the city of Miami,
Wow.
where I'm from.
Very good, thank you. So I'm going to direct this first question to you, Faye. So as we saw in this this particular episode of this series, a number of dimensions of diversity and conflict that can result from different intercultural interactions came out, and certainly very pervasive were those in and around sexual orientation and generational differences. Before we get into those topics very specifically, I just want to find out a little bit more from you about how we can encourage dialogue, how we can get past some of the issues, some of the things that are both unintentional and intentional bias that can eventually and ultimately hinder cultural understanding.
So two things that I have learned around all topics associated with diversity is that it really takes people willing to be courageous and take risks with each other, particularly when we're in systems in which people profess to have some caring for each other. That willingness to discuss the undiscussables is what will actually make movement. In this particular family, if you notice, it was when Caroline exploded with what she was really feeling that she was able to actually get through to her mother. Now, what she said and how she said it weren't what I would call classically good ways, but it was honest, real feeling that took place. And it was at the point that there was authenticity around the feelings being expressed that real movement actually begins. And I think difficult conversations require that people are willing to go beyond the polite into the authentic and take risks.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Doug, I'll ask this question of you. So this particular film or this episode that we saw really kind of helps to elevate or lay the backdrop for some of the challenges that we need to overcome in society. In fact, you heard Celia dealing with some of those things as well as she was kind of going through her journey to acceptance. What would you see as some of the more salient issues that impact the LGBT community, and what have you seen in the work that you do?
Let me count the ways. Well, first, I mean, there are many. Yes, things are clearly improving, but I would first have to say they can't marry in 35 states. So that means that those 1,000+ federal benefits are not afforded LGBT folks. They're not afforded the support of the community in at least legally, and therefore also socially and in many regards. So they have to spend, in addition, thousands of dollars to try to ensure that their partner will receive inheritance, that they can be by their bedside, that they can advocate for them. I mean, just all those kinds of things that marriage allows, as well as adoption, as well as orderly dissolution of a relationship, which is important, and the responsibilities of marriage as well. I think the social contract legally recognized is an important piece as well. In Michigan, as in most places, in most of the cities in Michigan and the state, they're an unprotected class, so they can be denied housing, jobs, all kinds of things, and it's dangerous. I mean,
For sure.
homophobia is alive and well, and so, we all know stories of people who've been beaten up, killed because they're perceived to be gay, kicked out by families. Still, suicide is highest group of suicide are LGBT youth. So, and to not know if you're going to be treated as friend or foe, that's difficult. Families being kicked out. Caroline said at one point in the film, she said, "I don't need her. I don't need her for anything." Well, that's just not true. I mean, we do need the people in our lives, everybody to care and to affirm who we are, but especially parental figures. Of course, she could get along without her, and a lot of LGBT folks have had to do that, but we do need. So we need for families, for communities, not just to accept, but to affirm folks as they are.
Thank you very much. This is very good. So Colette, in the work that you do at the LGBT Resource Center, I know that you spend a lot of time and certainly have the great opportunity and done phenomenal work in assisting some of our students, LGBT students, in coming out, particularly to their parents. I thought that this film was interesting because there was more of an older person coming out to their parent. What do you see as some of the issues that people face in having to come out with their parents, and what kind of support do parents typically offer? So I'm going to give you a two-part question, so that's one side of it. The other side of it is, can you share with us a little bit in your experience the impact of parental acceptance and rejection of a child that comes out?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I think that as a society, we do a really poor job preparing parents for the possibility that their child may be gay or gender nonconforming. And we have such a great opportunity because we do excellent support of parents, and parents, when they are in the process of looking forward to having their child, they go to classes, they buy lots of expensive things which have come to be like a badge of parental competence. If you get the best stroller or the best crib or whatever. And we have dads participate in childbirth. That is a time when parents are so open and so invested in being good parents, and we miss an intervention at that point. Thank you. And we miss an intervention at that point to teach them about the possibility that they may have a gay or gender nonconforming child. And the advantage to teaching all parents that would be that not only for the families where they have these children would they create safe spaces, but also for other families that these children interface with, there would be additional safe spaces for them, which currently don't exist. So I think that's one way we fail parents today. As far as the impact of parental acceptance or rejection on children, there is some unbelievably brilliant research out of San Francisco State University by Dr. Caitlin Ryan from the Parental Acceptance Project. And she looked at families' response to their gay or gender nonconforming children. She went into it with the hypothesis that families would be either accepting or rejecting. But indeed, she found out that there was a third kind of family, a celebratory family. And those are the families wherein children thrived.
Wow.
And what she has been joining with parents around is simply keeping their child alive. Whether or not they agree or whatever kind of dissonance is happening with them and how they've been brought up, what their church may say, they can agree on the fact that they want their child to stay alive. So she has examined behavior that puts the child at risk for either suicide or other kinds of harm, and behavior which serves as an inoculation for children to keep them safe. So what was surprising to me about her research was And children who, when they came out, if their parents received this by physically harming them, by beating them, which certainly some parents would respond in that way, thinking it is in the child's best interest, that child is at 8.5 times greater risk for suicide than a child who is not harmed in that way. Okay, that you can pretty much, that wasn't a big leap for me. But what was a big leap for me is children who were kept from their LGBT friends or told not to tell other people or to behave a certain way when they went to a family event. Those children were also 8 times at risk for suicide. So those seem a little more harmless maybe, but indeed they're not. These children are more likely to engage in attempted suicide or risky behavior. So ways that parents can be accepting, even as they go through their own process, if they can separate those two, their behavior toward their children and their own process, and not make their process the children's process, that is very helpful and healthy.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So, Dr. Hilton, conversations across generational difference can regardless of the conversation or discussion, can be very tricky. Trust me, I'm having one of those discussions with my son right now, so I know that they can be very, very tricky. And it's largely because there can exist differences in values, beliefs, and experiences. So if you had the opportunity to give advice to someone who needed to come out to an older parent or an older family member, what would be some of the advice that you might be able to give them?
I would say, obviously, there's no right way to come out. So it may depend on the person's relationship with their family or their loved ones. I would say, definitely make sure you have a supportive environment, and as Colette noted in the panelists, a significant number of students now in 2013, they are not in those supportive environments. So that's when you look for those resources within the community or your college campus or stuff to that nature. I will also say, that's, as Colette noted, also another opportunity to educate the parents, their loved ones, their families. Another suggestion may be also, you have a lot of students that come out in anger, as within the film that was depicted. Caroline, informed her parents when she was 18 years of age, and they said, no, that's not you. And then, of course, now she's a grown woman, and she came out in a sense, again, in anger to her mom to say, this is me, either you get it or you do not get it. But I think it's not a time to succumb to peer pressure or need for false bravery, because, I think also, it's growing up in Miami, it was a fad. So it was the in thing to say they're gay or they're homosexual, or so some of it thought it was a laughable project that they were working on in school. So they took it, they didn't take it to heart. They took it as is, oh, this is a fad. Kendra is gay, so I'm gay today. So you have a lot of that within most significant number of metropolitan cities where they see it as a fad. And then eventually they say, well, I was just playing when I told you all I was gay.
Wow.
And you see that within the K-12 classrooms. So some people think it's a funny item, which is definitely not a funny item at all. So there's a lot of research out there about how the cool polls, how students are playing with this item instead of really honing in to say, is this really me? Stuff to that nature as well. So confusion on their part may increase the confusion on the part of ones in the older generation. So when doing this, the individual ought to be comfortable and confident in their decision, of course, and make sure they're in a welcoming environment.
All right.
So I don't know if you all have seen that, where it has been a fad or not. But I know there's some research out there in reference to it.
Well, we'll ask the panel, have any of you heard that or recognized that research?
I certainly have seen more often when parents want it to be a fad. And need it to be a fad. And that kind, and not that I'm negating anything that Adriel said. I totally agree that that could be the case, but I've seen parents pressure the kid until eventually the kid says, well, okay, no, you know, and then they go underground, and that's very dangerous for the child for many different reasons.
Sure.
I think it also comes sometimes from a lack of understanding of what a sexual orientation really is.
Sure.
You know, it's not having feelings for the same sex, an attraction to the same sex person from time to time. You know, so I think the culture doesn't deal well with sexuality to begin with, let alone you know what it means to be straight or gay, gender nonconforming. And so I think it arises from that a lot.
Correct. No, I agree. So I went to a magnet high school in Miami, from the city of Miami, Florida. The schools are broken down into magnet programs, so you major in finance or you major in the arts, stuff to that nature. And in my high school, a significant number of the students came out in like 9th grade, 10th grade.
All right.
So we had trans community there. You know, one of those individuals was Eugene, now is Sheena Devine, and one of the biggest trans persons in the city of Miami. So my high school was welcoming to all, but I grew up in a metropolitan area that had those resources for those students.
Sure.
You know, in the city of Miami School District, you know, there's plenty of counseling services, and there's aid definitely there within that city.
Yeah. I want to turn back to the parents for a second, because it seemed as though, to me, Celia really faced a lot of hurdles and a lot of struggle. In fact, it depicted many of her psychological and emotional journeys. I think at one time she even referred to it at the very end, she just called it psychobabble, for example. So, Faye, we saw her do that, and we certainly saw where she felt that she blamed herself for this found identity. My question to you, I guess, is number one, do you think that that's a large-scale issue? Do you think parents blame themselves? And if so, why do you think that might be?
So I'm a parent, and I would agree that parents blame themselves for a lot of things. Because, of course, we feel that we control the world that our children live in. Erroneously, we think that. But to pick up on that, one of the most significant moments in this film for me was when Celia was telling Alan about the moment that her daughter tried to talk with her about her sexual orientation. And Caroline says that I tried to talk with you about it, but you've probably forgotten. For both of them, it was a very significant moment. And yet I think Celia truly did want to deny, make it not real, wish it away, because to accept that her daughter might in fact be lesbian did mean that there was some failure on her part.
Sure.
Because I believe that we as parents think that if our children aren't perfect, aren't leading the perfect lives that we dreamed about for them, wished upon them as they were growing up, then it is an indictment of us. What's too bad is that not enough parents will own those feelings, own statements like that, and have authentic conversations with their children. I was talking with a woman recently whose daughter is lesbian, who is living her life and, like all of us, has some things that are going really well and some things that aren't going really well. And I asked her mother, what was that moment like in your family? And again, it was interesting because my friend, the mother, had said, when she told me, what I said to her was that I suspected that that was true. And they went on to have an authentic conversation because her daughter said to her, I was afraid to say anything any earlier because I didn't think that you would love me. And her mother was stunned. And she told her, there is nothing that you can do that I would not love you. And what she ultimately said to me is that everyone in our family system knows that my daughter is a lesbian. She has chosen to live her life out. She does not want a secret life. And everybody in the family has been encouraging and open with her. And yet she has a partner who has a very different family circumstance. In her partner's family, her mother appears to have accepted the fact that her daughter is lesbian and has a partner, but she doesn't want her daughter to talk about that in other situations. When they are out and about, she wants this screen to go up, this pretense to happen. And so when I was talking with my friend, she was saying it's really sort of a surreal circumstance to have my daughter be completely open with whomever, her employer, other friends, family, etc., and yet have a partner who has to have a veil over part of her life, not created by herself, but created by her mother, because her mother cannot handle her daughter's life truth.
Wow.
And I think that that's true of a lot of parents.
Very good. Absolutely, yes.
Well, like Faye, I'm a parent. I'm also the parent of a gay son. And I think to answer that question about why parents blame themselves, we have to go past the interpersonal to the systems that we live in, which we live in a very heterosexist culture.
Yes.
It's also very cisgenderous, meaning we expect children to have an uncomplicated relationship with the gender they were assigned at birth, and that's just not the case for many, many children. And so the parents are really tortured by this kind of system that says you have failed in some way if your child does not fit in this box. And it's not realistic, it's not healthy, and it's a system of oppression that we have to work against by educating parents that things could be different. They could have a kid who's gay, they could have a kid who's gender nonconforming, by challenging our ways of being, our assumptions that we make with children, with relationships. What's the very first thing we ask when a baby is born?
What's the sex?
Is it a boy? Is it a girl? There was a great chalking on Grand Valley's campus a few years back. It was a picture of a baby stroller, and the question was, is it a boy or a girl? And the parents said, they haven't told us yet. We have a long way to go before we get to that point. But in the meantime, we can begin to make spaces for parents who are trying to in a very healthy way navigate these situations. We can challenge our own expectations and the language that we use with people. Instead of saying, does your child have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Is your child dating? Is there any love interest? Be creative, but just to challenge these boxes that we assume everybody fits in, that really create very damaging situations for so many people.
I would like to just add a comment about systems, because I'm a part of an employment system, and working on diversity-related issues in the workplace can be fraught with landmines. And I remember when this particular topic came up at Steelcase, and employees really struggled with why we would want to have statements in our company that said that we were non-discriminatory across a whole host of dimensions, including sexual orientation, because people just have such emotional attachment. But what was interesting is people don't think about and talk about parents who are in workplaces who feel constrained when it comes to talking about their children.
So true.
I know people in my workplace who don't talk about the full life of some of their children.
Sure.
Because of judgments that they worry about others make, and so it reinforces some of those messages that you were talking about, that parents get about not having these perfect children, and that there must be something wrong with you because your child does not fit the norms that we believe should exist. And so it's just interesting about how systems continuously reinforce bad stuff.
Yeah, it's, you know, as a parent, you almost want to talk more about your children than you do about yourself, because we see them as an extension of us. Colette, I'm going to go back to you for a second. So we hear a lot and certainly talk a lot about parents supporting LGBT children, their LGBT child. What does that support look like? But more importantly, is that support so very different, or how is it very different than the support that you give to a child that's not an LGBT child?
Certainly. It is very different. Depending upon your family's identities, all the identities that you hold, your child is now disclose to you that they have a marginalized identity. Now, maybe this is the first marginalized identity they're holding, or maybe this is one of many, making their identity very complex, and them having to negotiate which identity is the most salient in different situations. But when my son came out, I said, this is like you telling me you're a member of the Inuit tribe of indigenous people. You don't know your people, you don't know your culture, you don't know your history, and I can't help you with that. So being able to connect your child with resources and to LGBT friends that you may know who can serve as role models, we certainly did a lot of that. Additionally, I think probably the greatest gift you can give your child is to do your own work, not on your child's clock. To recognize how you're feeling inadequate, how you're getting those messages from other people, by protecting your child from that as much as is possible, by demanding that family members and friends treat your child with respect and not say, is your friend coming over, but say boyfriend, girlfriend, you know, to own it. To teach them how to be in relationship with your child. And that it is a journey for parents, as we saw with Celia, as I've certainly experienced. You have to educate yourself and really be committed to educating yourself, and to make that separate from what your child is going through, to really be able to step outside yourself and support your child through that.
So, Adriel, kind of keeping on that line of support, so we saw there in the episode when there was the confrontation, if you will, between Celia and her daughter, and Celia made the statement, you're not in love with her, kind of like shut it down in a sense. And we know that happens from time to time, and largely it's because, as Colette and others on the panel pointed out, sometimes people just don't want to accept that reality. So from a shutdown perspective, parents, family, friends, whomever, when that occurs, first of all, is there any good way, do you feel, for someone to be able to avoid that shutdown? And then secondly, if it does occur, what do you think are some next steps? What are some next steps for
Sure,
that person that got shut
So
down?
this is in my opinion. In my opinion, of course, I believe that that there's no good way to avoid a shutdown, simply because rejection of any kind hurts, especially from those who loved you, you know, from loved ones in our lives, family, parents. So in an ideal situation, a person who comes out to parents or people may want to have some kind of established supportive network, which is what we spoke of and what Colette and Faye just noted, of course, you know, and you don't have to have those persons that identify within the LGBT community. You know, also there are allies out there throughout the nation
Sure.
that will provide support. You know, those consist of friends, counselors, hotlines, other family members, networks through secret societies, social organizations. In addition, using resources such as community agencies that may be able to assist those students as well as college campuses that have LGBT resource centers or state system offices that have LGBT resource centers. You know, I just recently moved from Iowa. In Iowa, the organization is, there's a state organization that does all the LGBT resource work there within the state capitol in Des Moines. And, you know, the organization is fierce,
Sure.
you know, very flawless and out and about within the state doing work. We've had that organization on the campus that I used to work at Upper Iowa, and we established a safe zone program for students in rural Iowa that could not go to Des Moines for services and provided support for those students. So definitely looking out that, you know, a lot of folks think that only persons that identify within the LGBT community would provide that support, but there are allies that are outside of that community as well.
Excellent. So Doug, you know, shutdown can occur from family, can come from your inner circle or your social circle, but there's a bigger power that can shut down the laws and identities of people in the LGBT community, and that's the legislature. So Michigan, for example, how do you think, or how do you see Michigan laws impacting LGBT members as well as the children of same-sex couples?
Well, in Michigan, you can't adopt if you're not married. To a non-married couple, an individual can, but a non-married couple cannot adopt. That's what the in fact, I was last week at this time, I was in Detroit at the U.S. District Court, where people were expecting that Judge Friedman might rule on the amendment that doesn't allow same-sex marriage in Michigan. That really started out as challenging, with April DeBoer and Jane Rouse, challenging the state's ban on not being able to adopt as a couple if you're unmarried. So they were in a catch-22. So my understanding of it was that the judge saw this really as a right to marry issue, and so that's why it got all got tied up in that. So right now, you can't do that. So, you know, if my partner had children, I can't adopt those children. The partner couldn't adopt my children. We couldn't adopt children together. So there's no protection then for those children. If they split, if one of them dies, if a grandparent wants to take custody, then the other parent, but not legally parent because they weren't allowed to adopt by the state, has no recourse. They couldn't try to get custody, and so the state probably would side with them.
Sure.
For getting custody. So that's huge. Families are not recognized as families. Even when they have children that both of them are equally caring for. I have a number of folks in the congregation who have had children, and they're stuck in that exact same place. How do they both brought these children into their world? How do they protect their relationship with those children? How do they protect those children? In the state of Michigan right now, they can't.
Wow.
So that's huge for families. It
Sure.
provides a great deal of instability. It provides a great deal of worry for both of those parents. We simply don't recognize them as family.
Sure.
And that's huge.
Wow, powerful stuff. So I'm going to ask one last question of the panel, and then we will go to the audience for questions or comments based on what we said. And the question is this: who do you see as the heroes or heroines of this particular episode? And Adrienne, we will start with you this time.
Sure. So I would say, of course, the daughter, Carolyn.
The daughter, Carol?
Yes.
Yes.
The daughter of Carolyn, because, she's reached a breaking point in her life where she's saying, I'm going to live for me and not for society. I'm going to live for me and not for my parents. I'm going to live my life.
Absolutely. Okay. Faye?
Mine was Alan. I actually wondered what conditions in his life created his thoughtfulness around the issues and his willingness to lose an important relationship of his own in order to create more honesty and authenticity. So mine was Alan.
I thought two things about Alan. I thought, number one, that Alan's daughter might share something. She might come out. And the second thing, I thought he was out of here at the end. So I was a little worried about that. But I'm sorry. Colette, please.
Well, instead of naming a person who was the hero, I'm going to name the behavior, because I think this behavior is one that
Very
can
good.
be taken for parents who may be out there watching, and that's one of differentiation. And that's the ability to stand on your own 2 feet and be separate from another person. And we saw that in Caroline, the daughter, when she said, what my mother forgets is that I'm on my own. I don't need anything from her. Well, of course, she needs her love and support, but that she was highly differentiated from her mom. And then Alan was highly differentiated when he said, wow, you are someone that I fell in love with, but I can't tolerate this kind of behavior. I'm disappointed. I don't understand it. I need to get distance from it, even though it's going to cause me great pain. So I think that kind of behavior is one that parents who are dealing with children who are coming out can really look to say, I need to separate what I'm going through from what my child is going through, and never, ever take away that safety net from my child.
For sure.
I think in many ways, Alan, for me as well, I mean, certainly Caroline, I would agree in terms of becoming who and standing in that no matter what. But I want to raise what I thought was a really interesting piece at the end when Alan wakes up. He says to Celia, it doesn't matter, and that's before he knew that and the sort of his vision or dream of visiting her. So, on the one hand, that's troubling in the sense that was he really willing to stand where he was regardless, but he also is modeling the behavior that he with Celia that he wanted her to model with her daughter, that you are who you are. That doesn't mean in the case with her, that her behavior was appropriate, that Celia's behavior was appropriate. But I'm in a bit of a quandary there. That's the one piece about it that I especially appreciated, because at the end of the episode it left me with that. Yeah, that's right. He was accepting her for who she is, and yet his earlier stand was, you don't treat people, your own daughter or anyone, this way. And so I'm left with not quite knowing where that is, and that's a dilemma that I feel as well, to try to love people, accept them where they are, but clearly not accept that behavior. But stay in relationship. I find that fascinating. I'm glad it was there, because everything else was pretty cut and dried, but that was I appreciate that.
See, for me, it was Celia, because I like movies when the villain turns good and he comes in and saves the day. That's my thing. So, anyway, before I turn to the audience, would you please join me in giving a thunderous round of applause for our wonderful panel and their insights. Thank you. So we will now take questions from the audience. We're going to ask that you speak into the microphone. We're taping, and we want to make sure that all of your wonderful questions and voices are heard. So whoever would like, you can feel free to come on up. All right.
While she's coming up, I do want to comment on what I thought was an interesting character, which was, I believe, the youngest son.
Sure.
Because at the same time he had a very supportive moment for his mother, he is picking on his brother around the same topic. So it was just interesting.
Good point. Yes.
That sort of
He
dichotomy.
didn't even have one line in the whole thing.
No. I'd like to touch on the subject of the shutdown. My 18-year-old nephew came out to me and his mom and his other aunt last year, and we were celebratory. Everybody was great. We were happy. It wasn't a big shock, and we were all great. We were in Mexico celebrating. That's when he told us. And then when we were coming back, he said, "Don't tell Aunt Barb." Why? She'll shut me down because she's not accepting whatsoever, and almost mocks him to the point like, "Are you seeing any hot chicks?" and just sticking it to him. And I don't know what to do about her. And I'd love it if everybody could come full circle and celebrate his life and the man that he's become and what he's going to become. And she's just kind of the little sticker in there. So,
Advice or thoughts? If you could use the microphone, because we're not picking up everything. So.
Okay, I just have one comment, because I'm not sure that it's clear for me.
Okay.
Who stands for him with his Aunt Barb? I understood the part about celebrating his coming out.
everybody's good except Aunt Barb and her husband.
No, I don't mean about who's good and who's not.
Oh.
Who stands for him with Barb? When she does the digs, the comments, who says to her, that is unacceptable
I do.
behavior?
Everybody does. And she'll just turn around and walk away. Oh, heck yeah. We shut her down. But she doesn't learn. And he is afraid of her, how she will respond to him. She's hell on wheels. Everybody's scared of her. So,
Yeah, go ahead first, because I'm going to jump in as Mama Bear.
people pray for me.
Well, I think, I mean, Colette said she's going to jump in as Mama Bear, and that's exactly right. I mean,
Yes.
you know, to stand with him in that case means to be absolutely clear with her that that is completely unacceptable behavior. But I think it's also helping him to, I mean, parents have to be brave.
Yes.
Regardless of how they feel about what's going on, they have to be brave. They you know, will do anything for our kids. And, you know, kids in the congregation that have had just terrible struggles,
Sure.
you know, their parents, their allies, they have to be brave, and that means risking their own relationships, you know, like Alan did. But I think it also means giving your nephew tools to deal with that, to stand up to it, or to understand that he doesn't have to have a relationship with her. It'll be on his terms, not on her terms. And I think, you know, that's part of what adults do, is give younger people the tools that they don't have to meet expectations, especially people who are toxic. And we
That's
tend
exactly what she is.
and we tend to, you know, we all of us tend to be like the person who doesn't like cats, the cat always tries to get them to like them. We tend to be the same way, and that's not helpful behavior. And hopefully we eventually learn that as adults and can accelerate that learning in people. But that it has to be modeled. Not to be mean to folks, but there is a time when you simply do not engage a person who is toxic like that, and you help him to be okay with not engaging it as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, here comes Mama Bear. I would say that we don't want to throw away Aunt Barb, but you want to stand together in solidarity with your nephew. Yes. And it can be really powerful if, for example, in my mind, I'm imagining your family at Thanksgiving where you say to her ahead of time, listen, this is not okay. But then she ignores it because she's hell on wheels, and she does it anyway. And then the rest of you are just fierce. You all have talked about it ahead of time. You get up, you put your coats on, you grab your bags, and you all walk out of Thanksgiving dinner. And then she's left, right? This is, a way that you can help her find her own humanity, as well as inoculate a nephew against some behaviors that are very deadly for him.
Very.
And you don't want to ignore, because it's uncomfortable in the family, the impact on his lived experience. It's phenomenal. And he may be making it okay for you and for his mom, his aunts whom he loves,
right,
but he's bearing it. Mm-hmm. So.
The other part of that is very important in terms of standing together is the message that you send to the other young people in the family. Because they, like the young people in this film, they are watching, they are observers, and they are absorbers. And so you have to protect this young man so that other young people in the family know that they protected him around this issue, they will protect me around this other issue.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in my family, we're known as the Council of the Ants.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one comment to make, and I wanted to make it to everybody in the room. I think we're at a disservice if we watch this clip from this TV show without really investigating and looking at the intersections of multiple identities that are playing into this. So we have a white family with a daughter who's lesbian in an interracial relationship.
Yeah.
Two things, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about a European culture in which it appears that the characters have education. So we're talking about social class. And I think at the very end, Celia talks about she had this road to Damascus moment. And that is a hint to reference in a faith story from the Bible. So we've got multiple issues here working together. And I think if we look at this with just the lens of looking at the LGBT issues, we're missing how all those other pieces play together and how it impacts people's stories, so that we can't say one person's story is going to be exactly the same as another person's story.
Absolutely.
But because all those identities intersect so powerfully, that means that we can't interact with one another with sort of cookie cutter responses. We have to really look at the entire picture. And I think that's part of the beauty of this part of the miniseries. I don't know if it's a continuing storyline, but it's the beauty of it. It shows you in real life. Granted, yeah, there are so many things going on here, right? Mm-hmm. But I think we really need to be cognizant of economics, how that plays into this, culture, how that plays into this, how this interracial relationship plays into this. So I think I just kind of want to remind people that to walk away and to only look at this one issue is to miss the vast complexity of what we're really talking about in our world. So,
Sure, you make an excellent point. We can't generalize the film or the show, which is ongoing, to everyone that has this type of story, or it's coming out, or is a member of the LGBT community. This is not generalizable based on intersectionality. One's income bracket, did they attend school, was their lived experience, like I always say, their lived experience and how they were gendered, meaning how they were raised. So I definitely agree.
I would agree in great measure, but it's also one of those things that cuts across so many of those cultural kinds of issues. I mean, regardless of education level, of income, and so forth. I mean, you know, there until fairly recently has been, you know, universal disdain and discrimination against LGBT people or or people who are nonconforming. So, though I agree with you, and that it's hugely complex, the simplicity of it is that across the board, folks, you know, like Caroline have not been accepted, let alone celebrated. It was also kind of fascinating that this wasn't the storyline, but the fact that she was Nigerian was a non-issue. Now, it certainly could be, but in terms of how it was dealt with, it was because they were so freaked out about her orientation that one just kind of slid over. We all got it. But it's like, well, that's an issue for another day, maybe, because this was the primary issue. I just thought that was kind of rather fascinating.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to go a similar route, and not so much around the complex identities, but the other aspects of other systems of oppression at play in this episode, right, which I found interesting, which sort of maybe builds on the point that she was just making, and what Doug was just making, is that first, John, right? Here he says to Caroline when he talks to her the next day, I feel used, right? So this is like he's screaming this heterosexism and patriarchy, like somehow it's a reflection on his manhood, right? So, which is a whole nother thing that I don't think they didn't do much with. I wish they would have took that a little bit further. Although I thought Caroline's response was like, "This is not about you, brother. This is about me." So her response was really great, but I wish there would have been a little bit more. And then the whole thing with Kate, the very fact that she is Nigerian, that she's an immigrant, and that sort of the dealing with issues around neocolonialism and white supremacy and all those kinds of things. And we certainly know within the LGBT community and people identify as queer that those things are just a whole nother layer of things that make it even more difficult. So while people identify as LGBT or Q who are white, they certainly struggle with a great deal of oppression in some ways. But if you have those other identities, or you're dealing with those other things, it's even worse. Absolutely. And disproportionately, those are folks who are kind of left out of the conversation when we're talking about LGBTQ issues. And so I'm just wondering if anybody could respond to those observations.
I'd just like to validify that by saying the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs does an annual hate violence report, and for the past 3 years, hate violence against the LGBT community has increased. 87% of the victims are people of color.
And just as we're talking about this oppression and series of and issues of power, let's just not forget that the reason that this particular episode had the subject matter that it did was the whole issue of power between parent and child. And the fact that we have a grown child still wanting to kind of fight against or ultimately get that level of acceptance from the parent who has a particular, has certain values and beliefs that imploded on her. So it's a point very well taken. Had another question? Or did we have another response?
The other piece that I thought that you mentioned, John's response, is that typical response of sort of equal suffering. You know, his being used paled in comparison to everybody else who was involved there. But that's invoked, so often, and people don't generally respond to it as effectively as Caroline did.
I thought John was being absolutely ridiculous because he left his wife for somebody else to begin with. So that was. But the thing that I find intriguing about this series, and it's why I'm going to look for season 2, is exactly those issues that were set up in terms of complexity. Because when the and she's Nigerian came up, I said, oh boy, we're getting ready to get into some racial stuff now, and then it didn't happen. So I'm believing that many of these issues that also make people's lives complex are going to play out in future episodes of this program.
Sure.
Because none of this is simplistic. All of it is very complex.
I just got the hook. So we have about 5 minutes for one more question, if you would like.
We talked a lot about how to come out to parents, but I think one thing that was completely ignored in the film was how the parents may have come out to the children, having to have dealt with a divorce, and then, bringing this other person in, and throughout the episode, they were very well behaved with it, but again, you mentioned how, he was embracing of his mother, but condemning of his brother. And so perhaps you could talk about some of the issues that may take place when that happens and how to deal with that.
Anybody want to tackle that one?
You were talking about the two brothers.
The children never.
Okay.
Right, because you talked about coming out to parents.
So, parents coming out to the children, how does that play out?
Well, I certainly want to share the answer with all of you, but I was just wanting to comment. Oftentimes, that agency is taken away from the person who's coming out, and this was the case for Caroline with her children, because John blew everything up. And so there it was, and so she has to come out to her child through this awkward sobbing. He's sobbing in bed. She just tells him that she loves him, which of course is lovely, but it's out of her control. And, that's really unfortunate and not helpful, but often the case because, LGBT lives have been in the media for so long sensationalized. So this kind of news that John brings to Celia carries this sort of spark that's ignited and just blows up. And we see that quite often.
I don't know how to answer your question. I think it's a very interesting one. The thing that strikes me, one of the things that strikes me that makes the conversation difficult for parent to child, is most of us don't talk with our children about our own sexuality. And so this is a case where a parent has to think about, how do I talk about my sexuality to my child and not create discomfort, dis-ease in the family system. And so I think you've asked a great question. I would love to know if anybody in the room has thoughts about that.
Dougie, were you going to make?
Well, I mean, interesting point in relation to talking about children, about your own sexuality. A young woman was learned about sex, and she had a sibling, and she went to her mother and said, "You mean you and Dad had sex twice?" So I mean, kids don't get it, but I think it clearly depends on the developmental stage of your child. For most of their life, it's all about them. I mean, are they going to be protected? Are they going to be okay? What are the family systems are systems, and they intersect with, the social systems. And so, helping that child understand that they're okay. And I think, the young man's problem as he was an older one, he was worried about his mother. He knows what can happen to LGBTQ folks. And so, that being able to demonstrate that she is able to stand up to it, she said, I can deal with mean. And I think, modeling that. I mean, I've known scores of parents that have come out to their kids, and, it really is an issue of they love their children, they love this other person. This is what sexuality is about. The kids love their parents. So kids get it. I mean, my experience is the kids get it pretty quickly. They're just worried about the ramifications. And so I think to be able to have communities that care for their parents and to help ameliorate some of that fear is critical.
Where I think in the film there was a missed opportunity was the son who was silent. No one checked in with him to find out how any of this was impacting him. And I think that he would have been an instructive moment for all of us if his mother had said, I don't even know if the kids had names, but I've talked with Lawrence, and I've assured him that I love him in spite of this storm that's hit our family. What's happening with you? He was an older child. It looked like something was troubling him. He looked concerned for and about his mother. And so, to your question, there is a missed opportunity in terms of no one engaging that child in dialogue around this storm that went through their family.
We'll take one more comment.
We've done seminars in our congregation helping children to deal with that, because there have been a number of divorces because of people admitting, coming to the place where they realize that they're gay. And so, in our Sunday school classes, they do joys and concerns, and the kids have brought that up, and other kids have been very supportive of them. So they're, having communities that help support is really key.
So the credits are rolling on us right now, so we're going to, and again, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your conversation. Thanks again to our panelists. I think this was a very, very fruitful discussion, and certainly look for more opportunities to support WGVU Engage. Thank you.
Do want to, on behalf of WGVU, thank everybody for coming, but also let you know, as you've heard about WGVU Engage and all the things it's doing, that not only can we have these discussions, but to give you a little behind the scenes that not many people in this room know, that if you saw the promo for last season, or Last Tango in Halifax at the very beginning, and promos that ran around the country on PBS, those promos were changed thanks to Sean, Adriel, Keishan, and George in this room on an inclusion committee, because PBS sent them to us and said, what do you think about these promos? And they were forwarded to those 4 individuals, and the wording for the LGBT couple was changed before it went national on PBS. So thank you guys for being our panel, and that's what Engage is about. Not only having these discussions, but it changed an entire promo that went around the country. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you, did a great
We had the right folks, didn't we? That
You
is
were great.
This was wonderful.
Moderator.